As we gather to discuss our theme, advocating for women and girls,
Princess Diana's words were more than ink on paper. They were pieces of her heart captured in letters that revealed her deepest fears, hopes, and truths. These private writings became treasures for those who cherished her, symbols of a woman who lived and loved beyond the constraints of the crown. But what happens when those letters, fragile reminders of her humanity, fall into the hands of someone who saw them not as treasures, but as threats? In a shocking twist, Camilla's alleged attempt to erase Diana's voice set off a storm inside the palace. The act of destruction became an act of betrayal, one that led to outrage, consequences, and the ultimate humiliation of being thrown out. Diana's letters, a window into her soul. Long before the world knew the full weight of her struggles, Diana poured her heart onto paper. Letters became her private sanctuary, a place where she could express what duty and appearances demanded she hide. Each word was a fragment of her soul, written with honesty that the cameras would never capture. To those closest to her, these letters were treasures, not simply because they carried her handwriting, but because they revealed the truth of a woman who was both adored and trapped within the walls of royalty. Diana's letters spoke of love and loss, of joy and unbearable sorrow. They held her fears of isolation, her battles with self-doubt, and her dreams for William and Harry. In them, she was not a princess on a pedestal, but a mother, a friend, and a woman searching for peace in a life that offered little of it. Her words carried tenderness, vulnerability, and courage, making them a window into her heart that history could never ignore. For the public, Diana was a radiant figure who lit up every room she entered, but behind that glow were storms that few understood. In her letters, she admitted to the loneliness that haunted her, the pressures of constant scrutiny, and the pain of a marriage that crumbled before the world's eyes. She also wrote of her joy in motherhood, the laughter of her boys, and the hope that they might grow into men who understood compassion above all else. These letters became the most authentic record of who she was, unfiltered and uncensored. Even after her tragic death, the letters lived on as living testimony. Friends, confidants, and even historians guarded them as sacred artifacts, reminders that Diana's story was not only about her public role, but about her private voice. They became proof that her humanity was stronger than the palace's attempts to control her image. In those handwritten lines, the world could see her as she truly was, flawed yet extraordinary, fragile yet unbreakable. To the monarchy, however, the letters were more complicated. They carried truths that could not be neatly fitted into the narrative of royal duty. They revealed cracks within the facade, emotions that contradicted the polished exterior of the institution. For some within the palace, these letters represented danger, for they gave Diana power long after her passing. As long as her words existed, her presence endured, untamed and unedited by official memory. This is why the letters mattered so deeply. They were not just scraps of paper tucked into drawers. They were the heart of a woman whose life was cut short, yet whose story refused to fade. They gave voice to emotions that millions related to and reminded the world that beneath the tiaras and titles was someone who loved, suffered, and hoped like everyone else. Diana's letters became her legacy in ink, and their survival ensured that no attempt to silence her could ever succeed. Camilla's growing insecurity. From the moment Diana entered the royal family, her presence overshadowed everyone around her. Her beauty, her compassion, and her ability to connect with ordinary people created a bond that even decades after her passing remains unbroken. For Camilla, stepping into the role of Charles's wife meant stepping into a comparison that would never end. Every gesture she made, every dress she wore, and every smile she offered was weighed against the memory of Diana. No matter how hard she worked, Diana's ghost remained the standard, and Camilla knew she could never fully escape it. At first, Camilla tried to ignore the constant comparisons, focusing instead on her duties and on supporting Charles. She attended events, stood politely in photographs, and devoted herself to causes such as literacy and domestic violence awareness. Yet the shadow never lifted. When newspapers printed her image beside Diana's, the headlines always favored the late princess. When crowds gathered at royal appearances, the cheers for Camilla never matched the affection that had once been reserved for Diana. Even silence spoke volumes, for the absence of warmth reminded her that the public had not forgotten. The existence of Diana's personal letters made the burden heavier. Every word written by Diana kept her memory alive in a way Camilla could not compete with. These letters were not official speeches or rehearsed interviews. They were the unfiltered thoughts of a woman who had touched millions. In them, Diana lived again, her voice rising from the page to remind the world of who she was. For Camilla, this felt like an intrusion into the future she was trying to build, a reminder that she was living in a story already written by another. Her insecurity grew not only from the public but from within the palace. Staff members who had once served Diana spoke of her with reverence. Portraits of Diana still hung in places of honor. Even in conversations with the younger royals, Diana's name surfaced with love and pride. Camilla was reminded again and again that she was an addition, not the foundation. The presence of those letters was proof that Diana's legacy was not just remembered but preserved, tangible in ink and paper, ready to outlast time itself. For Camilla, each reminder became a wound. She longed to be recognized in her own right, to have her name associated with loyalty and dignity rather than scandal. Yet the more she tried to establish herself, the more Diana's memory seemed to rise like a tide that refused to retreat. The public's affection for Diana was not fading with time, it was strengthening, and Camilla's attempts at acceptance felt constantly undermined by that truth. Insecurity turned to frustration, and frustration to quiet resentment. Diana was gone, yet she remained everywhere, in photographs, in memories, and most painfully in those letters that carried her soul. For Camilla, the struggle was not only against perception but against permanence. The presence of Diana's words meant she could never truly take her place in history without first confronting the legacy of the woman who would forever remain the people's princess, the discovery of a hidden treasure. For years, Diana's personal letters were spoken of in hushed tones, treasured by those who had once been close to her and feared by those within the palace who wished her memory would fade. Many believed that the letters had all been accounted for, locked away in safes or preserved in archives, carefully guarded from curious eyes. Yet history has a way of surfacing when it is least expected, and one day the whispers became reality. Hidden away in a box tucked deep within palace storage, a new collection of Diana's letters came to light, and with them came the storm that would follow. The discovery was not dramatic at first. A staff member sorting through old belongings stumbled across the box. Inside, neatly folded pages bore the unmistakable handwriting of the princess. The ink had faded slightly with time, but the words were alive, vibrant, and filled with the emotion that defined Diana. Some were addressed to friends, others to family, and a few to confidants who had helped her through her darkest hours. Each letter carried a piece of her heart, speaking not to duty or protocol, but to the raw honesty of a woman navigating a life of unimaginable pressure. As word of the discovery spread quietly among trusted individuals, the weight of what had been found became clear. These were not just historical documents. They were Diana's voice, unfiltered and unedited, a continuation of her story that had already captured the world. To the public, they would have been priceless treasures, proof that Diana still spoke across the barrier of time. To those within the palace who feared her legacy, they were something else entirely. They were power. The content of the letters revealed Diana's deepest struggles and her brightest hopes. She wrote about the isolation she felt within the royal household, the pain of betrayal, and the love that carried her through in the form of her 2 sons. She also shared her dreams of a monarchy that could be kinder, more open, and more human. Reading them was like stepping into her soul, as though she were speaking directly to those who held the pages in their hands. For Camilla, the discovery was devastating. Already living in the shadow of Diana's memory, she now faced the reality that Diana's voice had been given new life. The letters reignited affection for the princess among those who read them, ensuring that her presence would continue to outshine Camilla's attempts to redefine herself. It was not only the past resurfacing, but it was a reminder that Diana's influence could not be silenced even decades after her death. The hidden treasure had been found, and with it came the question of what to do next. Should the letters be shared with the public, preserved as part of Diana's enduring legacy, or should they be quietly contained to avoid stirring old wounds? Within the palace walls, the debate began, but for Camilla the answer seemed clear. These letters were not treasures. To her they were threats, and their very existence would push her toward a decision that would change everything. Camilla's desperate act. The discovery of Diana's hidden letters shook the palace like a tremor. For the staff who handled them, it felt like finding jewels that could never be replaced, delicate pieces of history that carried the voice of a woman who had left too soon. But for Camilla, those same letters felt like daggers aimed directly at her already fragile place in the monarchy. Each page, each carefully penned word, was a reminder that Diana's shadow was stronger than her presence, and that the late princess still commanded love and loyalty she could never match. Camilla had spent years building her image, carefully working to prove that she was worthy of respect. She attended countless engagements, smiled for endless photographs, and championed causes that mattered deeply to her. Yet no matter how much she gave, she remained in the shadow of Diana, forever measured against a woman whose compassion and charisma had become legend. The existence of these letters threatened to undo whatever ground she had gained, dragging her back into the role of rival rather than consort. It was in this cloud of insecurity and desperation that Camilla made her choice. She convinced herself that the letters, so precious to others, were dangerous to her future. To preserve her own place in history, she had to diminish Diana's, and the most direct way to do that was to destroy the fragile testimony of the princess's voice. The act was not calculated with coldness, but driven by fear, a fear that Diana would forever remain the Queen of Hearts, while she remained an intruder in the royal story. The moment she took the letters into her possession, the atmosphere around her shifted. She held in her hands the last private words of a woman adored by millions, a woman whose story could never truly be silenced. To tear them, to burn them, to erase them was more than an act of preservation for herself. It was an act of betrayal against the memory of Diana. Yet in her mind it seemed necessary, the only way to stop the ghost of the past from consuming the present. Camilla's desperate act was carried out quietly, with no announcement and no ceremony. She believed that by removing the letters, she was removing the threat. But what she did not realize was that such actions are never truly hidden within the palace. Secrets have a way of surfacing, and acts done in fear often leave traces that cannot be concealed. In that single moment of desperation, Camilla crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Destroying Diana's personal letters was not merely an attack on paper and ink. It was an attempt to erase truth, to silence a woman whose voice had already defied death itself. What Camilla saw as self-preservation would soon be seen by others as betrayal, and the consequences of her choice would ripple through the palace with unstoppable force. Caught in the act, secrets within the palace rarely remain hidden for long. The walls may be lined with history, but they also echo with whispers. When Camilla took Diana's letters into her hands, she believed her actions would vanish quietly into the silence of locked rooms. Yet palaces are filled with watchful eyes, from aides who know every detail of official archives to staff who notice even the smallest changes in routine. It was one of these watchful eyes that first realized something was wrong. The disappearance of the letters raised immediate suspicion. The box that once held them was returned, but the delicate pages were gone. Archivists tasked with safeguarding royal documents began asking quiet questions, tracing the chain of custody, and searching for explanations. It did not take long for the trail to lead toward Camilla. Those who had seen her with the letters could not ignore what they had witnessed, and though none wanted to believe it, the truth became impossible to dismiss. Whispers grew louder. Trusted staff members shared their unease with one another, and soon the realization spread that Camilla had not merely borrowed Diana's letters, but destroyed them. The horror of such an act was indescribable. These were not just papers. They were fragments of Diana's soul, a record of her voice that could never be replicated. To see them treated as disposable was, for many within the palace, an unforgivable betrayal. When the truth surfaced, it sparked outrage. Some staff reacted with disbelief, convinced that no member of the royal household would dare commit such an act. Others responded with fury, angered that Diana's memory had been desecrated in such a deliberate way. In the private world of royalty, loyalty is sacred, and Camilla's actions were seen not only as disloyal, but as destructive to the very heart of the monarchy. Princess Anne, known for her sharp honesty, was one of the first to confront the matter directly. Her reaction was swift and fierce. To Anne, destroying Diana's letters was an assault on truth itself, an attempt to rewrite history and erase the legacy of a woman who had captured the love of millions. Anne's voice, unyielding and clear, made certain that the matter would not be quietly buried. For Charles, the discovery was devastating. Torn between loyalty to his wife and the legacy of Diana, he found himself once again in the center of a storm he could not control. His silence only added to the weight of the scandal, as aides scrambled to manage the fallout, and advisors debated how to contain the damage. Camilla's desperate act, meant to silence Diana, had only amplified her presence. The destruction of the letters ensured that the late princess's memory would burn even brighter, fueled by outrage and sorrow. In being caught, Camilla not only lost the trust of those within the palace but also invited the judgment of the world beyond. What she thought would be forgotten became the very act that defined her humiliation, a betrayal that could not be undone. Princess Anne and the royal backlash. When news of Camilla's destruction of Diana's letters reached Princess Anne, it struck her with a force that few other scandals had. Anne had always been known for her forthright nature, a royal who valued honesty and tradition above appearance. She was not one to tolerate disrespect, especially when it came to the memory of Diana, a woman who had captured the hearts of the people and left behind a legacy that still defined the monarchy. For Anne, the act was more than reckless. It was unforgivable. Her reaction was swift and unflinching. While others whispered in corridors or tried to contain the scandal, Anne confronted it directly. She made her disgust known to those within the palace, refusing to soften her words for the sake of diplomacy. To her, Diana's letters were sacred, pieces of history that carried not only personal meaning, but also the emotional connection between the crown and the public. To see them destroyed was to see that connection severed by a woman desperate to erase the past. The backlash did not stop with Anne. Across the royal household, aides, advisors, and even distant relatives expressed their outrage. Many had admired Diana in her lifetime, some had worked alongside her, and nearly all recognized the importance of preserving her story. Camilla's actions were viewed as selfish and destructive, proof that she still saw herself in competition with a woman whose influence extended far beyond the grave. The palace thrives on order, but in this case, order was shattered by a sense of betrayal. Anne became the voice of that outrage. Known for her bluntness, she didn't hesitate to call Camilla's behavior a disgrace. Her words carried weight because she rarely wasted them on trivial matters. If Anne took a stand, it meant the issue was serious. Her condemnation gave strength to others who felt the same but feared speaking up. Soon, the quiet anger within the palace became open opposition. Camilla found herself isolated. Though Charles remained at her side in public, the atmosphere around her had shifted. Courtiers who once greeted her with polite formality now did so with cold restraint. Conversations hushed when she entered a room. Every glance seemed to hold judgment, every silence carried the weight of unspoken accusations. The woman who had fought for years to earn her place now faced the possibility of losing it entirely. Anne's stance was not about rivalry or personal dislike, it was about principle. She believed that the monarchy survived by respecting its own history, by honoring those who came before. To attempt to erase Diana's voice was to undermine that principle. For Anne, defending Diana's memory was defending the integrity of the crown itself. The backlash within the royal family grew impossible to ignore. What had begun as whispers of disapproval became an open wound that threatened to rupture the fragile balance holding the monarchy together. In that moment, Anne stood firm, a reminder that some legacies are untouchable, and that even within the palace walls, there are lines that must never be crossed. The Queen's silent judgment. Queen Elizabeth was a woman who understood the power of silence better than anyone. Throughout her reign, she had faced crises, scandals, and storms that could have shaken the monarchy to its core. Yet she endured them not by shouting or accusing, but by allowing her stillness to speak for her. When the truth of Camilla's destruction of Diana's letters reached her, the Queen's response followed the same pattern. She did not call a public meeting, she did not summon cameras or issue proclamations. Instead, she let her silence weigh heavier than any spoken word. For those who served close to the Queen, her judgment was always clearest in the smallest gestures. A glance that lingered too long, a handshake withheld, or a pause before acknowledging someone could carry meaning more cutting than an outright rebuke. When she greeted Camilla after the scandal, the distance was unmistakable. There was no warmth in her eyes, no softness in her tone. She offered the bare courtesy required by her position and nothing more. It was a judgment both cold and final. Those who knew Elizabeth understood why this act angered her deeply. The Queen believed in history, in records, and in the preservation of truth. Every letter, every diary, every document was part of the monarchy's story. To destroy Diana's personal words was not only an insult to the late princess, but also an attack on the integrity of the crown's legacy. To Elizabeth, it was an attempt to rewrite what could not be rewritten, and for that she had no forgiveness. Within palace walls, her silence spread like a chill. Advisors avoided bringing Camilla's name into conversation with the Queen unless absolutely necessary. Even Charles, who often sought his mother's counsel, found her less open, as though his wife's actions had created an unspoken barrier between them. It was not only Camilla who bore the weight of the Queen's silent disapproval. The entire household felt it, and the atmosphere grew tense with the knowledge that Elizabeth had made her position clear without uttering a single word. Camilla sensed it immediately. She was a woman used to whispers and cold glances, but the Queen's silence was something else entirely. It was not anger expressed in words, but judgment delivered with dignity. It left no room for defense, no space for explanation. Camilla could attend engagements, smile for photographs, and stand beside Charles, but she knew that behind the calm mask of the monarch she had been found unworthy. The Queen's silent judgment carried consequences. Courtiers who might have once supported Camilla now distanced themselves, unwilling to align with someone the monarch herself had silently condemned. Charles remained loyal, but even his influence could not shield her from the quiet force of his mother's disapproval. In the royal family, silence is rarely empty. It is strategy, it is condemnation, and it is finality. In this moment, the Queen reminded everyone that authority does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply refuses to acknowledge, and in doing so it delivers a judgment that echoes louder than any words ever could. Camilla thrown out. The palace has always been a place where appearances are everything. Outwardly, it projects stability, tradition, and unbroken continuity. Yet behind those stately walls, decisions are made that carry the weight of centuries, decisions that can elevate or dismantle a royal life in a single stroke. When Camilla's destruction of Diana's letters became undeniable, the whispers, the outrage, and even the Queen's silent judgment converged into one outcome. She could no longer remain inside the palace. Her removal was not announced with fanfare, nor was it written into any official document, but it was as clear as any decree ever made. It began quietly. Invitations to private gatherings stopped arriving. Doors that once opened to her presence began to remain closed. Advisors who had once greeted her with measured courtesy avoided her entirely. Even staff who had been trained for absolute discretion could not hide their disdain. In a world where subtle gestures carry the weight of verdicts, Camilla was being cast out, one exclusion at a time. Charles tried to shield her, but even his loyalty could not overcome the tide of judgment rising against her. The destruction of Diana's letters was not a scandal that could be buried under silence. It had struck at something deeper, at the emotional bond between the crown and the people, and at the sacred memory of the woman who had been mother to the future kings. Charles's pleas for understanding fell on deaf ears. His mother, his sister, and his advisors were united in their stance. Camilla had crossed a line from which there was no return. The final act came when Camilla was asked to leave the residence she had once shared so comfortably within palace grounds. There was no dramatic confrontation, no shouted words, only a firm and undeniable message. Her presence was no longer welcome. To remain would be to dishonor the legacy she had tried to erase. To leave was to acknowledge the gravity of her betrayal. For Camilla, the humiliation was complete. She had fought for years to be accepted, enduring ridicule, scandal, and endless comparison to Diana. She had walked through fire to stand beside Charles, and just as it seemed she had secured her place, it was torn from her. To be physically removed from the palace was more than rejection. It was exile. The image of Camilla stepping away from the gates became symbolic. Though no cameras captured it, those who knew the truth understood that her expulsion marked the triumph of memory over ambition, of Diana's enduring legacy over Camilla's desperate struggle for acceptance. The act of throwing her out was not merely punishment for her betrayal. It was a declaration that some voices cannot be silenced, some legacies cannot be erased, and some lines within the monarchy can never be crossed. In the end, Camilla's departure was more powerful than any speech. The palace that had once tolerated her had now rejected her completely. The message was clear. Diana's words may have been destroyed, but her spirit remained untouchable, stronger than ever. The unbreakable legacy of Diana. Diana's life was cut short in tragedy, yet her memory has proven stronger than time, stronger than scandal, and stronger than the attempts of anyone to diminish it. The destruction of her personal letters was meant to silence her voice, but instead it amplified it. People spoke of her with renewed passion, remembering not only the princess she had been, but the woman who dared to live with honesty in a world built on protocol. The act meant to erase her only underscored how powerful she remained, for no fire, no shredder, and no betrayal could take Diana away from the hearts of millions. Her legacy endured because it was never built on image alone. It was built on love, compassion, and humanity. Diana touched those forgotten by society, holding the hands of AIDS patients when fear kept others away, sitting beside the homeless, comforting children, and lending her presence to causes that desperately needed attention. These were not staged gestures, but acts of genuine empathy, moments that defined her not as a princess distant from the people, but as one of them. Her letters may be gone, but the world already knew what they contained because her actions had spoken those truths in life. The royal family understood this, even if some wished to ignore it. Princess Anne's defiance and the Queen's silent judgment made clear that Diana was more than a chapter in the monarchy's history. She was its conscience, a reminder of what royalty could and should be. For William and Harry, she remained the mother who shaped their values, the woman whose influence still guides them. Through them, her spirit lives on, ensuring her story cannot be rewritten. Camilla's fall only reinforced the contrast. While her attempt to destroy Diana's words led to her humiliation and removal, Diana's legacy grew brighter. The people rallied once again around her memory, proving that love cannot be erased by fear or jealousy. Every attempt to bury her story only deepened the affection with which she is remembered. Even in her absence, she continues to challenge the monarchy, forcing it to reckon with the gap between duty and compassion, tradition and humanity. The unbreakable legacy of Diana rests not in physical objects, but in the hearts of those she touched. Her personal letters may have been destroyed, but her voice lives on in every life she changed and every memory carried by those who adored her. History belongs not to those who try to control it, but to those whose truth cannot be silenced. And so Diana remains eternal, the people's princess forever. Her spirit hovers over every royal appearance. Her name lingers in every conversation about compassion and truth, and her influence shapes the monarchy even decades after her passing. Camilla may have tried to erase her, but instead she reminded the world that Diana cannot be erased. She is unbreakable, untouchable, and unforgettable. The story of Diana's letters and Camilla's downfall is more than a tale of royal scandal. It is a reminder of the power of memory, the resilience of truth, and the way legacies endure long after the ink has dried and the voices have fallen silent. Diana may no longer walk among us, but her presence is as strong as ever. Her compassion, her vulnerability, and her strength continue to inspire millions around the world. No act of destruction could diminish her. In fact, every attempt to silence her only magnifies her spirit and proves that she remains the people's princess. Camilla's desperate actions revealed the depth of insecurity that comes with standing in Diana's shadow. For years she sought acceptance, trying to carve a place for herself within a story already written. Yet history cannot be rewritten by fear. The palace may hold traditions, titles, and power, but Diana's legacy belongs to the people who loved her. It lives in their memories, their stories, and their unwavering devotion. That is why, even when her private letters were destroyed, her truth was not. It remains alive in the collective heart of a nation and in the future of the sons she raised. The Queen's silent judgment, Anne's open defiance, and the backlash that followed all point to one undeniable reality. Diana's influence is eternal. She continues to shape the monarchy even from beyond the grave, a force that reminds the royals of their humanity and their duty to serve rather than rule. Her story cannot be erased because it is not just royal history. It is human history written in compassion, honesty, and love. The question now is not whether Diana's legacy will endure, but how it will continue to shape the monarchy's future. Will the crown embrace the lessons she left behind, or will it keep struggling against a truth it cannot contain? Stay with us as we uncover more untold stories, betrayals, and triumphs that reveal the fragile yet fascinating world of royalty. See you next time.